Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the unceded lands and waters on which we live, work, and depend. We recognise all First Nations peoples around the world and celebrate their enduring connections to country and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special episode of I Think You're on Mute. I'm Beth Eggleston, and this is a very special episode as I'm joined by the fabulous Pam. I have finally convinced one of my HAG team members to be a guest co-host with me. I first met Pam in the Philippines, where we ate quite a lot of Korean barbecue. We were doing some research on the protection of civilians during conflict, and Pam's been working with us ever since. Welcome, Pam. How's everything going in Manila? I hope things have settled down after the recent typhoons.
Hi, Beth. It's lovely to be here, although I might say that podcast really isn't my wheelhouse. I really love the behind the scenes and the writing and analysis, but I'm really excited to be here. I'm really good. It's been a reflective week of writing and thinking for this project we're working on, understanding localization in Vanuatu. How are you doing, Beth?
I'm well. It's busy getting towards the end of the year, but I have to admit I'm very excited to be able to hear about this work that you're doing and digging back into our favourite topic of locally led humanitarian response. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this project is about?
Absolutely. So, if you remember, Beth, back in 2018, Humanitarian Advisory Group has proposed a new framework called Measuring Localization Framework. And it's a framework that's been used in 20 countries, including Vanuatu. So, with that exercise, Humanitarian Advisory Group and VANGO brought together civil society actors, international partners to understand what do we mean by locally led action and where does Vanuatu stand in different domains. So we're going to talk about that later, but it's an interesting time to reflect back on that study and understand what progress already exists. What are some of the persisting barriers that needs to be challenged, and what are some of the opportunities and aspirations towards strengthening locally led humanitarian action in Vanuatu? I know these are all big questions, big topics to discuss. So just super interesting to hear from the many perspectives of humanitarian actors in Vanuatu in terms of the shifts that they've been seeing as well.
That's right. And we are going to be hearing from some very special guests on this podcast today. So we're going to be joined by Linda, an independent expert from Vanuatu that we've worked with for many years, and also Shirley from the Vanuatu Association of NGOs. And they've both been right at the heart of this work. They've been working closely, I know, with you, Pam, as you've sought to seek reflections for people who have been involved in recent humanitarian responses. And we also know that we're coming up to the 1 year mark since the earthquake. So it's going to be really interesting to understand how the localization agenda has progressed in Vanuatu. So grab your cup of coffee, tea, or your beverage of choice and settle in. This is a special episode at the heart of the response, Vanuatu and the path to localization. So I'm going to hand over to my new co-host now, and you're going to be able to hear her interview with Linda as she explores where localization has been going in Vanuatu.
Hi, Linda. It's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me today about this piece of work that we've been doing together with VANGO in Vanuatu. Before we ask questions and discuss the research, can you quickly introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background?
Thank you, Pam. Nice to see you. My name is Linda. I'm from Vanuatu, from an island called Tana. I have been doing a lot of work with HAG since 2016, and it has been in the space of localization. Currently, I am doing some work under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, under the project for urban planning. We are building emergency shelters that are being built by CCCC. I work with a crew engineer group called Quebec. My work is safeguard and environmental specialist. From time to time, I am always happy to do work with HAT, and I've been doing that every year. HAC has always been giving me that opportunity to work with them, and I loved working with HAC, and I'm happy. I will always look for, I never say no to working with HAC in any of their projects. HAC is doing a fine job. They are one of the organizations that have changed a lot in localization space for Vanuatu, and they are continuing to do that now with VANGO, and hopefully they will not stop there, but they'll continue to do to take that localization journey to where it's supposed to be in the future. So yeah. So my background is doing a lot of NGO work, doing a lot of community work, doing a lot of disaster work in relation to these different studies that we do to see, how can we respond better. So thank you.
Oh, good. I think there's a lot to say here about your experience, Linda. So, as you mentioned, you've been part of the initial baseline study way back in 2018 and 2019 when Humanitarian Advisory Group, VANGO, and Linda also look at what is the progress or what's the progress of localization in Vanuatu at the time when the sector was trying to define what localization means or what's the evidence to say that localization is happening. So this was way back 2019, and that's 6 years ago, Linda. So how would you describe where we are right now? So the 2019 baseline happened, and then we did now a progress review. How would you describe the progress in between? Would you say we're just setting out, or are we actually halfway up the mountain? Or are we at the point where we're enjoying the view from the top?
That's a really good question when you put it like that, localization being a journey. I think, first of all, this localization study, I think the journey began the moment we started asking those questions to the stakeholders, to the government, to the INGOs. Because for me, I've seen that when we started talking or asking questions about localizations back 5 years ago, it started putting those ideas, those reflection to those INGOs, from those local NGOs, to actually see that where are we? Are we doing things correctly? Are we doing it right? Or do we, some of the things that we are not doing are coming out in these questions? So that kind of like open their minds up. So in short, I will say, if we're looking at it as if it was a journey like a trek, I will say we've left the community or the valley, and then we are now moving up slowly. Slowly, we are leaving that base camp, and we are out and moving up slowly to where we want to go, but we have not reached that stage yet because we still have some challenges, we still have some obstacles, we still have some things that are still putting burden on ourselves. We want to move forward, but we are being held back. So I would say that we have moved and we are moving forward.
Yeah, I love how you described it, Linda. Like we're moving forward, we're moved past the base camp and we're tracking along slowly. I'd love to hear any specific ways that you've seen progress. Like, can you give me one example where you've really seen, wow, this is a progress from where we were at 2019 compared to how things are in 2025? Do you have any examples or maybe story that you could share just to illustrate that progress in the journey?
Okay, so if I take you back to 5 years ago when we did the study on localizations, we had our own definitions of what localization meant. Others had different definitions of localization there, but I think the definition that we used to describe what localization we meant when we were asking questions, that has really, I can say that it has spread. Some of the ways that I see that we've improved, when I say we, it means the INGOs, the local NGOs, the government, whoever, is I think one of the areas that we've really improved in is we have now to clearly understand the language. I mean, the language around
Mm,
locally led. We are not
yeah.
only implementing, but we are understanding that language. and that language has helped us to implement better, to be able to link that implementation
Right.
activities to the definition of localization. It really was, in a way, defining us. That is
Mm.
who we are. That is what we want to be, and that is where we want to go. Another way we progress is we now see donors giving direct funding to maybe just a few, but this is a really good progress. It hasn't been there 5 years ago. Now, for
Mm.
example, VSPD now has direct funding from DFAP direct to VSPD, Vanuatu Society of People with Disability, and that has really helped them with their activities. Not only peacetime activities, but mostly the activities for preparation towards disasters for people with disability.
All right, Linda. So we've been doing this research for the past few months already, and we've done a lot of consultations with civil society organizations, the government, and international partners. With all those consultations and interviews, was there anything that surprised you or challenged your assumptions during the research?
Okay, I think this question may be true to someone who's from outside, who is doing the study, maybe will say, "Oh, I am surprised with this." But for me, from here, being here, have been in a lot of discussions, and I've been in a lot of evaluations. These are not really surprising to me, hearing what they are saying to me. But one of the things that maybe a positive thing that I've noticed is when it came to capacity, we talked
Mm.
about capacity, and we can say that we always have the capacity, capability. It has always been there, because we know our context, we know our people, we know the language, we know a lot of the needs that are in the community. But I will say that one of the positive, yeah, you can say surprise is, how those capacity is already here. But what we are missing is we are missing resources, permission. When I say we are still missing resources and permission, what I mean is we would like to go out and do more. When we are under a certain structure, for example, I and Shield have certain structures where you have to follow through to get those funding. That sort of like limits us. It's not giving us the permission to go out and do more, respond as much as we want. Yeah. And then we lack those resources because we don't have those resources, those NFIs or whatever you can call it. That also limits us. But having said that, even though we have very few resources, if I may say, having that capability has helped us to continue to respond to all the communities as much as we can with those limited resources. We will continue responding until when we don't have any more resources. But that having the limited resource that has not stopped us from responding. And that is one of the good things about people in Vanuatu, from the national down, even down to the grassroots. What you have, you share. That's just who we are. Can I just add another thing? The last thing that I would love to add on to what I mentioned earlier is, if only we, in a world where, people can shift the mindset of localization. Shifting localization will only work best if we redesign that power. We change that power. We make that power work more towards favor of people who are doing this locally led responses. If we can not only redesigning that power, but also the process that comes with that power. If we can redesign those two,
Mm.
I think, and then not really focusing on training, because we keep having that excuse that, oh, they need to have more training. Why do we need to have the more training? We are facing these disasters like every year. We have come accustomed to these disasters, and we already know what to do. What we just need that power and that process to be changed, to move quickly to help and to respond to these people within the 48 and 72 hours. Because if you ask me, it's always 1 month later and you're bringing the first response to the community. Thank you.
Thanks again, Linda. That framing of localization as a journey is so helpful to understand that way back in 2019, there's been a lot of slow progress, as you mentioned, now that we're in 2025. Any other thoughts, Linda?
One of the ways that you can see that localization has really gone spiral, like everyone is really grasping what localization is you can see when, like in the past, you will see when there's a disaster, you will see all the internationals flying in, they're sitting there and they're giving instructions. Now that is no longer there. You have the government under NDMO leading, you have the INGOs coming into the table and getting instructions from NDMO, and then from there it goes down to the province. From the province, it goes down to area councils and then to the community. We are doing our own decisions. We are doing our own assessments and deciding on what we see best for the communities and also what we see best that for its INGOs. So we will say under NDMO will say these two can partner together because with that partnership they can respond better. So all of those is happening inside. We're no longer leading that from outside.
Excellent. No, I think that's super interesting way of saying that there's a lot of direction from the government on how response should go and how international actors should position themselves. And this brings me to my next question to you, Linda. If you could give one piece of advice to international partners working in Vanuatu based on what you've seen in the progress of localization, what would it be?
Okay, one advice to the international actors is we may already have those experiences, maybe from responding in other countries outside. But it's always good to respect the structures that we have here. It's always good to let the locals lead. It's always good to come in, listen, and see where you can come in to support. Let the locals tell you where they will be needing your help or your support. And it can be at the national level, at the provincial level, and at the community level. But it's always good to respect the structures and see
Mm.
how you can come in to support.
Yeah, right. That's a super interesting way of framing things, and Linda, that it's Vanuatu has a lot more experience when it comes to crisis and disasters, sometimes overlapping even with the experience of tropical cyclone Harold with COVID-19. And there was a lot of discussions that without international partners in country, people in Vanuatu were supporting each other and caring for each other at the same time, asking international partners on ways that they can appropriately support those who were affected by crisis. So I know we can talk more about this, Linda, but thank you so much for bringing to light that important perspective that it's about understanding that the communities themselves are already doing something. It's about international partners coming in and supporting and strengthening that further as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure. Yeah, I look forward to having more on these discussions later on. So thank you, Pam.
Wow, that's a lot of insights from Linda, the way she described the journey of localization in Vanuatu since the beginning that she was involved in the baseline study, and now that we're doing this progress review. Our listeners might be wondering, why is she talking about capacity, leadership, and in other areas when we talk about localization? And just a quick background, you'll read it in the report that we're talking about the 7 domains of localization, and that includes leadership, participation, funding, capacity, coordination, and complementarity, as well as policy influence.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's great to hear from Linda, and those reflections, I agree that they're so rich, and it's amazing to think of how far processes have evolved since 2019 when we did that original baseline. And I'm really interested to hear from Shirley as well and hear from her point of view how she feels things are going in Vanuatu in terms of how that power shift is actually happening.
I'm pleased to welcome our second guest, Shirley Abraham. Hi, Shirley. Welcome. How are you today?
I am good, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my experience on the localization in Vanuatu.
It's our pleasure as well, Shirley. Before we begin, can you quickly introduce yourself to our listeners?
So my name is Shirley Abraham, and I am the Chief Executive Officer for Vanuatu Associations of NGO, VANGO. I've started with that role since the last 2 years. I have been in the NGO space for, I think, over a decade, working with different programs, working with different NGOs. I have background working with youth organization for a very long time, and then I moved to education, and then I've joined VANGO in the last 2 years. So yes, I've done few research, and I was part of the localization baseline in 2019. And so it's great to see, the progress of localization from 2019 to current.
Such rich experience, Shirley. Can you tell us more about VANGO? What does VANGO do? What's the mission of the organization? And what are some of your focus areas?
So VANGO is the umbrella body of all the NGOs in Vanuatu. VANGO is founded in Vanuatu since 1991 and has been through different journeys. At the moment, there has been a lot of progress in the work of VANGO since the last 2 years. We were able to produce a directory of all NGOs in Vanuatu that includes the INGOs and the community-based organization. We're able to also produce our own materials around good governance, because this is where we work with our members to strengthen good governance and institutional strengthening. We're able to put together a reporting template for NGOs, specifically because the government is not recognizing the work of NGOs. So we are trying to capture the work of NGO in a report, and then, we can highlight the good work of VANGO.
Wow, that's so impressive, the work that you're doing, Shirley. You mentioned we partnered with VANGO back in 2019 to do the localization baseline, and now we're working with them again to understand the progress of localization in Vanuatu 2025 together with Linda, whom we've spoken to earlier. So now I want to ask you, looking back at your experience and also VANGO's experience over the past few years, which domain in the localization framework do you feel showed the strongest progress?
I would say that we felt that the progress was made mainly on the partnership. And this is because we have seen that the international NGOs are now having their localization plan, strategies, and therefore you can see that partnership has been made, especially INGOs working with national NGOs, and that is one strong, progress that I can talk about around those different domains.
It's so interesting because we've also heard from Linda that to her, if localization is a journey, you can really see so much progress from where it started and looking now in 2025. And among those progress that she mentioned as well is that partnership and leadership domains, which speaks a lot to what you mentioned around those localization plans and having more strategies to support their efforts as well. And by there, I mean international actors. So that's the strongest progress. What about the challenges? Which area did you have the hardest challenge to overcome in looking at those 7 domains?
Yeah, so, there is somewhat progress in other areas as well. This is to acknowledge that, the INGOs and the donor partners have also made attempts and also looking at localization as well. So we can see, slow progress in other domains as well. But one of the challenging one is the funding. When I talk about funding, I would see that you can still see the donor requirements. You can see that the due diligence requirements, that is like way beyond the capacity of getting a national or even community-based organization to be able to meet those requirements, meet those due diligence standards. And therefore, if we keep on going, on that same direction, if there is no changes of how the donor partners and also how the INGOs are looking at requirements and are looking at a lot of documentations, then a lot of the local civil society will just be left out. And for sure, there is no other way we would help unless you kind of like working with national NGOs, one of the strong national NGOs to sub-grant the small NGOs. So this, I can say that even this year, even end of December, we are still talking with the donors where they come in with like 16 long pages of an application form, a proposal form, which I can say that, yes, there is still that requirement.
Yeah. So looking at that, Shirley, and you mentioned that part of the role of VANGO is really supporting local NGOs. How has VANGO's approach changed over the past few years in terms of supporting stronger local leadership and participation?
So we at the VANGO Secretariat, we have ensured that, rather than, the civil society, they need support rather than us just turning, especially within the local NGOs, if they do not meet requirement, then let us support them as the umbrella body or as the secretariat. So what we did over time, and mainly was our strong focus this year, we employed a training and capacity support coordinator. And her role full-time is to meet with all the local NGOs and community-based organizations to support them to be able to improve their governance, to be able to improve mainly around the policies. Whatever the donor requires from them, we provided that support now. And for us is to be able to gradually support, if we say we're targeting 10 for this year, and we're trying to support them to that level where they can be able to meet those donor requirements, and some of which is having a bank account, having the financial policies, all these things. So VANGO is working on that, and we hope to see some progress, and we hope that some of these CBOs will be grant ready by early next year.
That's great. And there's a lot of work, I'm sure, involved in supporting local actors and making sure that their vision aligns with the capacity support that they also require. So reflecting back on your experience and on the review process, were there moments when we're doing the consultations with local and national actors as well as international partners that surprised you? Like, were there anything that they shared that was really striking for you as we did those consultations to understand the progress of localization in Vanuatu?
There is two different experiences, and for the community-based organization, one thing that we've come to realize now, it's kind of like not a surprise, but we realize that the community-based organization and national NGOs need a lot of support, a lot of holding their hands to be able to reach to that level where they are able to get the donor funding. And so this is from the community-based and the national NGOs. When you look at the INGOs, they have a lot of resources. And for us, we have realized that they also are accountable as well to donor partners, and some of which is like the system. Like, for us, is understanding that they also need to, they are able to get grants and they are able to get a lot of funding because there is systems in place. And this is something that's for VANGO as an umbrella body, it's kind of like, okay, you have a system here and your civil society is like way down here. So it's kind of like, for us, it's a lot of work to be able to elevate the civil society, because from the perspective of an INGO, it's not just like giving money. There is systems, there is policies, and there is like donor requirements of money from, if we say internationally, it has to go to another international organization that is based overseas, and that would be channeled there to like an INGO here. And so, yes, I think it's really challenging, especially for VANGO, to be able to put consistent support to ensure that all the locals and national NGOs are able to be grant ready.
Yeah.
And their capacity is another issue. A lot of them, they're working like one or two staff, or maybe only one person for local CBOs. And so these are some of the challenges and realization of it's not easy.
Exactly. Yeah, because we're looking at different resources as well. Like as you said, some of the local CBOs have one or two staff doing not only program implementation, but they're also doing partnership, admin, coordination, and comms. So it's all of these expectations versus the requirements as well that to meet. So it's like hard to balance both of these. Now, we're on the 1 year commemoration of the earthquake. Can you reflect on how has the earthquake influenced local leadership and the way communities engage in humanitarian response?
I would say that from VANGO, within the humanitarian program space, we were able to engage with our community-based organization. At this time, we're looking at the response, and after the response, we're able to do some organizational capacity assessment to be able to find out like what are some of the capacity and the resources that they have, what are some of the support that they need in preparations towards, if there is like, we're going through another cyclone season, how can they be able to better respond? For the international NGOs, I would say that they have also localization plans. And I can see that around partnerships, they're partnering up with the local and community-based organizations. So I believe that this is also happening. I would say that maybe on a slow progress, but for VANGO, yes, definitely we are working on ensuring that, after the earthquakes, we were able to assess some of the capacities. And now we're looking at providing more sub-grants to them so they can be able to, do more response work. We're entering a cyclone season.
Right. Yeah, and having that evidence to support the plan for capacity strengthening for local and national NGOs and CBOs. You mentioned international actors. I'm curious to hear if you could give one piece of advice to international partners working in Vanuatu based on what you've seen in terms of localization progress. What would it be? I
would say that the supporting community-based organization is more than them just partnering with them. They need to give them funding. They need to fully resource them in order for them to drive. They need like a good funding support, which should be just activity, but it should be like funding a administration cost, a staff support, as well as resources for the local and community-based organization.
Right. And that's so important, but oftentimes overlooked, especially in this climate of limited funding across the sector as well. So that's such a very powerful reflection. Now we're looking into what's going to happen next. Is there I guess I'm curious to hear what's your hope for how humanitarian sector will continue to evolve in Vanuatu moving forward.
For VANGO, we would like to see local actors and community-based organizations be at the forefront of humanitarian response, humanitarian support. And therefore, for us, our core focus for next year is to build their capacity. And that means that if we are doing that, we will also be advocating to the donors about giving funding to community-based organization or local actors, because from VANGO's side, we are working as well to ensure that all the support that they need, especially around good governance and also institutional strengthening, we will be getting funding for that, and we will support them so that they are able to be grant ready. Because a lot of the time we see that donor partners, they would like to give money just for activities. And this is one thing that we will also be advocating, that we don't want to see the funds coming in just for activities. We, as VANGO, we will advocate for funding that comes in, sufficient funding for staffing as well as administration as well as the activities.
Great. That's such a powerful reflection and a good way to end this part of the podcast. Thank you again, Shirley. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much to Linda and Shirley for spending time to chat with us today about all things locally led humanitarian action in Vanuatu. Their reflections have been so insightful. I think what they've described really shows why we need to look at the 7 domains together. And while there's been progress, there's still a way to go towards localization.
Yeah, I so agree, Pam. I mean, wow, what rich reflections. It is inspiring to see how localisation in Vanuatu has really evolved. And yet, yes, there is so much more that we'd still love to explore and learn.
Absolutely. And I think from that conversation and all the conversations that we've had in the past few months, we can all agree that first, local and national leadership in humanitarian response is growing and that progress is being widely recognized. Second point is there's a real shift in how partnerships are being approached. International and local organizations are showing stronger intention to work together in more meaningful and equitable ways. And the last point, despite this momentum, limited and inconsistent resources remains the biggest challenge. Without long-term investment, it's been acknowledged that it's hard to sustain the progress that communities and local actors are working so hard to drive.
That's so well said, Pam. And we really hope this episode has given you, our valued listeners, a glimpse into the progress, the challenges and the opportunities in Vanuatu's localisation journey, and maybe even spark some ideas for future research or different ways you can take action. The full report will be available on our website, so be sure to check it out. Thank you, Pam, for taking the leap to co-host with me. It's really a pleasure to have you here to keep me company, and I'm sure it wasn't as scary as you first thought.
Thanks, Beth. It was a pleasure co-hosting this episode with you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're interested in partnering with HAG on a future podcast episode, please visit our website and get in touch. This episode was made possible through our partnership with the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, PIANGO, and with support from the Global Support and Development Foundation. The views shared in this episode are those of the speakers alone and do not necessarily reflect the positions of the organisations they represent. This podcast was produced and recorded by Room 3, a production company that works with not-for-profits and social enterprises, and supported by Green Letter Communications.